Hi, everybody. I'm so excited. Once I heard about this event, I have just been like counting down the days to it. I'm so excited about it. I'm so grateful for the organization of this whole series. And I think to me, this session and this content is so much what I feel like so many people in the school are talking about and thinking about and wondering about. And I think both your practice and Adam's practice, who will join us in a bit, are really like tangible models, like very, very specific kind of responses to these questions of like, how could we actually do that? These are big problems. Like, how could we actually make a practice to address them? So I think it's just like beyond exciting to have you here. And I will now introduce you. So Ruth Mandel and Bobby Johnston are principals of Co-Adaptive in New York City, based in Brooklyn. And this is for anyone who has not checked out their work yet, they are going to show it to you. But this firm is really well known and is winning awards based on this really clear kind of objective, elegant and creative adaptations of existing building stock, looking at strategies to minimize embodied carbon and also operational energy. Ruth grew up in Vienna, Austria, and has worked on large cultural institutions from Eisenman to Coop Himmelblau and to small residential work with Richard Lewis Architect. And Bobby grew up in Santa Clara Valley in California. And he's brought this experience, kind of proximity to the computer programming, computer industry to his design work, and also working with various offices, including Perkins and Will, Flank and Enshin and Allen, now Stantec. And so they're prolific. They're doing all kinds of practice, teaching, I think advocacy, I would say. And I think the clarity of your work is so inspiring and really gives us like something to think that we can do stuff, to think that we can take on some really complex issues. So thanks so much for coming, and take it away.
Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having us. We're honored to share our ideas with you here today. You represent the future of our profession, and we feel that as a whole, architects can and should be doing a lot more as it relates to tackling climate change. And this is something that Bobby and I spend a lot of time thinking about in the context of our work, and we'll share some recent work with you here that sort of tries to start turning up that dial. But we ourselves realize we still have a ways to go, and we all need to be contributing our part. So first, it's important to note that even though it's just Bobby and I in front of you here today, Co-Adaptive is a team. We see ourselves as a collective, and this is them. There's one specific Waterloo grad actually missing from this photo. This profession is really collaborative, and we feel that it needs to be more so if we're going to solve some of the most pressing problems of our time. And so I want to urge you to always share ideas, to always help each other find solutions. At Co-Adaptive, we know that we are stronger when all voices are heard, and when we acknowledge that the manifestation of ideas is a collective achievement. Oops. So at the moment, construction processes are very linear. When something has reached the end of its determined usable life, it's discarded. Landfills are growing while resources are being depleted.
Construction and demolition debris is estimated to be nearly 1/4 of the national waste stream. Annual C&D is expected to reach 2.2 billion tons globally by 2025. According to the EPA, it has increased 342% from 1990 to 2018. We tend to think of what we throw away as going elsewhere, But the fact of the matter is that we all share one planet. And the junk that we discard here in the developed world disproportionately affects communities that are contributing hardly anything to this mess. There are no carbon taxes for the most part. It does not cost to waste. And as such, tearing down and starting over is still mostly cheaper than reusing of existing structures. Meanwhile, the energy embodied in making materials for new buildings around the world, mostly steel and concrete, accounts for about 16% of global carbon emissions. Embodied energy includes the entire life cycle of a material, from the extraction of raw materials to the manufacture, transportation, and installation of products at the building site. Cement production, which is a key ingredient of concrete and its most carbon-intensive ingredient, has increased almost 30-fold since 1990. Our industry is coming around to realizing that the operational energy needs to be reduced, but it is often assumed that the embodied energy of a building is small compared to the energy used in operating over its lifetime. However, assuming a quote-unquote normal operating efficiency, the amount of energy needed to build a house equals the amount used in operating it for about 20 years. In other words, if the house lasts 20 years, the total energy consumed is about half from building it and half from operating it. The conclusion we draw from this is that it is essential for us to pay attention to both embodied and operational energy in order to have a real impact. We have to design our buildings to operate at zero or as close to. There is no doubt about that. But in doing so, we need to pay attention to how we are achieving this goal. If we build a new passive house that operates at, say, 10% of a quote-unquote standard building, but there is an entirely new masonry structure and achieves its efficiency by packing it full of foam and spraying inside with spray foam, we're missing the larger point. Foams are petroleum-based, and eliminating the extraction and use of petroleum will be critical in reaching carbon emission goals, the toxicity of the stuff aside.
We feel that each building and within our cities, no matter how beautiful or ugly it is a treasure trove of embodied carbon, and we should be utilizing all of them. We just can't at this point afford to scrap stuff and reinvent it. We need to reuse, redefine, and adapt what we already have. And as we carefully take them apart to fulfill new uses and to improve their operational energy, we really need to be aware of what we take out. Where can it go and what useful life does it have left? Maybe another industry can use it if the building industry can no longer. And then ideally, if we take a step further and start thinking about demolition and deconstruction when we plan for things, if we start realizing that nothing we design is permanent, and we start planning for this impermanence, and we design in such a way that we're already sort of pre-anticipating things to be taken apart into their component pieces, then maybe instead of this big mess, every time we want to move a wall, we can conceivably plan for this wall to come apart and be shifted, and taking it apart and putting it back again, together again in its desired spot. And so if we start planning for deconstruction and adaptation, we can start closing this loop and ultimately reform our current linear practices into circular ones.
This is a shot through the window of an adaptive reuse project that we completed in 2021. The building dates back to around 1900. and it's a single masonry building with two lines of 50-foot by 100-foot A-frames that are heavy timber with columns and girders. The building was in bad condition when we first toured it. It had been compartmentalized over time, but to our client's huge credit, he was able to see its potential and bought it to convert to theatrical rehearsal studios. To celebrate the wood and masonry character of the building's interior, we chose to insulate the building from the exterior. This allowed us to expose the existing material's warmth, texture, and history of use. We even left intact the construction spray paint annotations that were exposed during construction. This decision reduced the need for interior finishes, significantly reducing the amount of drywall and paint that a project of this scale would normally have. It was both important to retain the building's existing heavy timber classification and to keep the embodied carbon of the new structural work to a minimum. As such, the decision was made to use cross-laminated timber for the required new structural insertions. This being one of the first commercial buildings in New York City to use the material. The building's existing material palette, especially the existing wood elements, became a very primary part of the interior. We left the existing heavy timber trusses exposed in their original finish. Any existing structural lumber that was removed in creating the double height space that you see here, and inserting our CLT atrium floor slab was carefully removed and stacked for reuse.
So in looking at it as we were taking it apart, we discovered that all the structural lumber in the building appears to be longleaf pine. This tree once covered 90 million acres of the US from southeastern Virginia to eastern Texas. And some of the trees were 3 centuries old when they were felled, dense and durable and saturated with resin that makes them unusually resistant to rot and insects. In the decades before steel began to dominate, longleaf pine was the strongest building material around. And the only way to find this original strength longleaf pine these days is precisely in this type of building. Manufacturing buildings built around the turn of the last century, in the big cities on the East Coast. And sadly, clear cutting of the vast southern forests in the late 1800s wiped the entire range of original growth hard pine out. There's maybe 2% left. So today, this material is a rare sunken treasure. We reused as much as we could in what we took out in the wood posts that surround the bleacher opening, and to divide up acoustic paneling in the main assembly space. Everything was cut down in place. Existing finishes were flaked off and largely retained and encapsulated with a clear finish. Everything we could not use was picked up by a local reclaimed woodworker who made flooring, paneling, and other things out of it that will find its way into other Brooklyn homes, hopefully. If you think about all of the carbon that is stored by these old logs, keeping them on site was really the best thing we could do, both to honor the old trees and to ensure that the carbon remains stored on site for hopefully another decade and beyond. This is a diagram we made to show the carbon capturing potential of these old growth forests. These old trees only exist in our built environment now, and we should never, ever have them end up in our waste streams. We're also showing the potential of reforestation if we move towards building anything new with wood. There's a quote by Joan Mark Simon, the director of Zero Waste Europe, that really resonates with us. There is no such thing as sustainable products or food. There are only sustainable systems. In nature, the sustainability of ecosystems is not related to the qualities of the parts, but rather how they interact with each other as a whole. So as designers, we need to start focusing on the broader systems of the elements we specify. The journey of our resources matter, and the only way to reach sustainable and dare I say, regenerative design is by paying attention to and closing the loop on our linear practices.
Last year, Coadaptive launched a construction management arm, Coadaptive Building. Our desire to start an architect-led design build arm was in large part informed by the fact that we want to have more direct impact on the material waste streams of our projects. Prioritizing careful deconstruction rather than demolition to ensure that whatever is removed is either reused or sorted for up or downcycling. Much of what comes out may still have usable life in it. One woman's trash is another woman's treasure. For items such as cabinetry, appliances, plumbing fixtures, or radiators, we partner with organizations that collect these elements for reuse, and we're able to provide tax donation credits to the property owners, often offsetting the additional cost of the deconstruction in many cases. In many cases, it saves money over demolition, we're finding. The larger members can become new architectural features, and existing details can be saved for reinsertion. Smaller elements can be separated by type to be downcycled for a new use. Some examples, we've taken joy set of projects and partnered with local lighting manufacturers to make lights out of them. We've ground down tiles from projects to make terrazzo. So there's a lot of...
This photo on the left just shows us carefully removing all of the wood details, which are made of Adirondack pine, and then we are stacking them in a tent in the backyard of that house, and then we'll reinsert them at the end of the project.
We made a sign to talk about the deconstruction and what's happening for people that pass by our projects and how it differs, and hope that this concept catches on to other architects, other builders, and homeowners.
So we feel that if we start moving towards a circular system, we can start conceptualizing borrowing man-made materials rather than owning them outright. Our metaphor for the city or the building as a material mine really becomes that of a material library. If manufacturers are held accountable for the entire life cycles of their products, it would increase maintenance and quality of the products, and it could change the economics of ownership and lead to more access and affordability in construction. Did it? Will we skip one somewhere? So as you can maybe tell, we're really passionate about this subject, but we're still ourselves on the path of discovery. So we're really excited to hear Adam's lecture, and also to hear your thoughts and comments. And we encourage you to never stop questioning the system we find ourselves in. As the next generation, it really is your job to question the status quo and to hold our older generation accountable for the way we're doing things now.
so much. That was wonderful. I think we have Adam.
Yes, can you hear me?
Hi, Adam.
Hi.
We're just about, we don't see you yet, but we're going to see you pretty soon, I'm sure.
Okay, well, thank you so much for having me, and sorry I'm not there in person. I'm just calling in from Vancouver, where we operate. And so, yeah, that was a great prior presentation. Pretty inspiring stuff to see some projects that are very progressive in this subject matter. And so I'm the founder and CEO of two companies here based in Vancouver, Unbuilders, Deconstruction, and Heritage Lumber. And what I like to say is that we're a circular economy within one group of companies. So there's going to be some similar subject matter from the prior presentation, but I won't linger on it as you've already heard. So Unbuilders is Canada's first dedicated deconstruction and salvage company. There's demo companies that do a little bit of salvage here and there, but we're the first that's really approaching this from a pure deconstruction lens. And we're changing the way the buildings come to the end of their life by tearing down that old traditional demolition paradigm. Heritage Lumber, on the other hand, is a reclaimed wood product manufacturer and lumber broker. We're innovating new building products to go back into new buildings and renovations. So these numbers and figures are a combination of Canada and the US, primarily based on EPA figures as well. And essentially the problem that we're facing, which has already been introduced, is just the mass amount of solid waste that the construction and demolition industry is producing every year in Canada and the US, which is what we'll focus on. And so we are the number one producer of solid waste in amongst all industries. And in most regions, this is anywhere from 25 to 40% of the total waste is from construction demolition. In most of Canada, it's around that 40% mark. And so that translates to 600 million tons is what the EPA predicts in the US alone. The Canadian number is only 4 million tons, which shows it's highly under-recorded because it should be closer to 50 million tons. And when you look at that material, when it goes to a landfill, it decomposes into methane and is released into the atmosphere. It's translated into 1 billion tons of CO2 released every year. So this is a massive contributor to climate change and global warming. And then breaking down that waste, 40% of it is just pure lumber, which should not be going to the landfill. It should be either recycled or salvaged, really. And that's about 240 million tons of lumber every year in Canada and the US that's going to the landfill. That has a raw material value of $262 billion. And when you turn that wood into value-added products, at least the higher end of it, the old growth, which was previously mentioned, it's over $1 trillion that we're throwing into the landfill every year. So this is not only wasteful and terrible for the environment, but it's just bad business. So our landfills are overflowing. The EPA predicts that 40% of all US landfills will be full within the next 5 years, which means we're going to need to clear more land for dumping our garbage. And when you put that waste into context, it's the equivalent of about 6 million homes a year that are landfilled just from the construction and demolition industry. So this is not a small problem. This is enormous. Traditional demolition is, for everyone in the room, I'm sure they're well aware, it is really the lack of any separation of materials. It's fast, it's cheap, traditionally, though that is thankfully changing with some policy changes. And it wastes all the resources because you're left with a mixed load of materials, which you cannot separate after the fact. The cost is too great, so this has to go to a landfill. Now I'm going to mention something that was passed here in Vancouver just as sort of to lay the groundwork for where policy is going and what good policy and bad policy can look like. So Vancouver was the first in North America to pass a green demolition bylaw in 2014. Since then, some American cities in particular have surpassed this bylaw by a long shot. And there's now the District of North Vancouver and City of Victoria, who have taken the hard lessons learned from Vancouver's bylaw and made a much better one. But essentially in Vancouver here, they introduced this bylaw, which is more of a recycling policy. So houses pre-1950 have to hit 75% recycling content, and ones that have been deemed to have heritage qualities have to hit 90% recycling. And all pre-1910 homes are supposed to salvage at least 3 tons of lumber, which is really not very much in a house. So this seems on the surface like a great progressive policy, and to some degree it has moved the needle a little bit. But the reality is the industry, and any industry, is going to find the least path of resistance and the ways to change the least and still achieve what the policy is. So really what's happened in Vancouver is we've got private landfill recycling facilities that are marking receipts as recycling, but the material is all going to the landfill anyways. So demolition contractors are hitting their compliance and saying that we're recycling all this material, and it's still actually going to the landfill. And the other thing is what's counted as recycling here, which is where we bring our unsalvaged wood as well, is it's usually mulched up and then incinerated for energy, or worse, just incinerated in general. And that's currently counted as recycling. And in my opinion, it needs to be, and that needs to come with a warning label because it's still releasing the greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. So this is what so-called green demolition looks like. It usually doesn't happen all on site like this video. It's just an effective video where the material is still mixed primarily, and then it's going to a facility where it's chipped up mulch smaller like this, and then it's either incinerated or it's brought to the landfill and it's counted as contouring material, basically fills in the gaps of the landfill. And again, in Vancouver, they consider contouring material as a recycling stream, which it's literally going to the landfill. Oh, this slide didn't turn out quite as I had it made. So our solution, this is where we come in and are offering something quite different. There's supposed to be a infinity loop in the background. So as I mentioned, Unbuilded is Canada's first deconstruction company, pure deconstruction company. In 2021, we diverted over 3,000 tons from the landfill, and we've hit 99% salvage and recycling on multiple houses. Our average for our building deconstructions is about a 90 to 95% waste diversion. And Heritage Lumber is then taking the lumber. We've got partnerships with Habitat for Humanity and the Reuse People, who take all of the non-lumber goods, and the owner gets a tax receipt for that. The lumber is purchased by our other company, Heritage Lumber, where we manufacture a variety of products and sell raw material. And so just in contrast with the last 2 videos, this is commercial deconstruction we completed in the fall. You can just see how different it is than the demolition that I showed. We stripped the building back completely, and layer by layer and material by material, we take it down intact and have that then go back into the supply chain for reuse and remanufacturing with very little waste left at the end. The impact from deconstruction is enormous. As I mentioned, 90 to 95% waste reduction right off the bat. So that's going to be big. And the other thing that's been quite interesting over the last few years, but really over the last few months in British Columbia, is there's been multiple lumber mills closing because they don't have enough wood fiber to produce lumber anymore or plywood. So in BC, the combination of forest fires and the pine beetle have decimated the forests here, that the mills literally can't get enough trees out of the forest to keep them open. And now there's also thankfully been new regulatory changes to cease the logging of old growth. Pacific Northwest is a similar number to the East Coast. Less than 2% of our intact old growth is still standing in the forest, which was still being logged. It is still being logged in some areas, but they have put a halt on that for the most part in the last few months. And so all those combinations all those factors combining are leading the mills to be short of lumber and therefore closing. Meanwhile, we're disposing of old growth lumber at higher and higher volumes every day as the demolition industry continues to grow. So we're trying to really show the connection between those two to not only the policymakers, but the industry as well, because we don't need to log the old growth anymore. We just need to start deconstructing. The other impacts that deconstruction has, which are fairly significant, the first one is a health impact. So on every demolition deconstruction site that we step foot on, we either do the abatement ourselves in-house, we have abatement partners as well on the larger jobs, but when a job is cleared, asbestos has been removed, and there's a third party that even certifies it's been cleared, we still have multiple abatement callbacks as we start to deconstruct the building. We find new layers, which shows us that every demolition that's occurring in our communities still has asbestos in it. You just can't get it all out from demolition. The only way to get it all out safely is to deconstruct. So our demolition sites are contaminating our communities, and they're contaminating the workers and the facilities where the materials are going. Deconstruction is really the only answer for that. And lastly, there's a social impact. So not only is there the social impact in the sense that we're partnered with Habitat for Humanity and they sell the salvage materials and use the proceeds to build affordable housing, which is a fantastic turnaround. So people that are hiring deconstruction contractors like ourselves are also fueling the construction of affordable housing. But we've seen multiple times where we're hired for the takedown of a building, we come and get going on site, and the community is extremely upset about a building coming down. And it's not something, we don't promote tearing down history. We would love to see more adaptive reuse of these old buildings. We'd like to see them preserved more than they are. But we come in once that decision's already been made, and we at least give an alternative to demolition. And so we're seeing on a daily basis, community uprise over buildings. We're taking down a chapel right now near Victoria. The community is quite upset about it. As soon as we start working, they see us salvaging, they see the materials piling up, and even potentially offering them for sale back to the community. It really quickly turns a negative experience into a positive one. So there's a big social impact that deconstruction has. And getting into the materials themselves now, so more on the heritage lumber side. As I mentioned, the materials are typically old growth coming out of these buildings. In the Pacific Northwest, buildings built right into the 1970s were still utilizing old growth for everything down to the 2x4s. And so, again, there's less than 2% of this material still standing. These trees were as old as 2,000 years on the West Coast. And the only place to get this lumber, to get this material now with the ending of the old growth logging is to deconstruct it, pull it out of the old buildings. And so Vancouver is one of the youngest major cities in the world, only founded in 1886, but yet it was built with ancient trees. So the history here is not necessarily in the buildings themselves, but the materials, which were stewarded and protected by the First Nations before the colonial times. Now, there's a lot of benefits to reclaimed wood. It has 92% less embodied carbon than new lumber, making it the greenest building material on the planet. So for those architects, designers looking to build sustainably, anywhere you're looking to put wood into a project and you can replace it with reclaimed wood, you're instantly reducing that embodied carbon of the product by 92%. And old growth lumber in general is about 3 times stronger than new lumber. So it's actually a better wood. So current construction, which was previously mentioned, is currently designed for waste, and this is a major issue. It's the biggest issue why I myself, I've got a background as a builder, and I've transitioned to unbuilding and building reclaimed wood products for this exact reason. I was building passive houses, and we were utilizing building methods that I didn't agree with, and so I transitioned out of building and will eventually get back into it over time. But there's a few main areas that are leading to current buildings not being deconstructible. The The first is that the materials are actually lower value than they used to be. So we're using a lot more engineered products, like the pictures show, OSB over plywood or shiplap solid lumber. And these materials just have low value in the resale market. On top of that, they're typically glued and screwed together, which means you can't separate them and you really can't salvage them in whole. And then the last thing are things like spray foam and caulking, which is really the enemy of deconstruction. And essentially, when you're using spray foam in large areas like the picture on the bottom right, you're yielding all of that material unusable again. So Heritage Lumber, our other company, we currently have an array of materials or of products that we are making at our mill. So we're making wide plank flooring, ceiling cladding, beam wrap, tabletops, countertops, mantles, and then we sell a lot of materials to custom wood shops that are doing more of the custom projects. We've also recently partnered with a company, which I have on the next slide, and we've manufactured modular construction with our materials and our lumber. A few months back, we acquired our biggest local competitor / partner, Western Reclaimed Timber. We're in the midst of co-branding the two companies or mixing the brands to become one company officially. And we did this move to start manufacturing in-house and then to grow on that site that we have now in Maple Ridge. The acquisition came with the previous owner, Bruce, who had 35 years in the industry. So he's a wealth of knowledge and an advisor to myself and a mentor, as well as a staff that had a lot of experience. So it's a very exciting move for us that we're now going to grow upon. And just two recent partnerships we've had that are also exciting for our company. The top one is a furniture company called Natural Pod. They're building sustainable furniture, and they're looking, we're in the midst of transitioning their entire supply from FSC certified plywood and FSC certified lumber to our reclaimed wood and our reclaimed plywood that we're currently R&Ding and have in prototype stages. And then the second one is Hewing House, that partnership with a modular builder, and the unit pictured here is built entirely from reclaimed wood, aside from the electrical, the insulation, the membranes, and the windows and doors, and roofing. So we have reclaimed siding, framing, interior, exterior cladding, flooring, and even the furniture inside the unit was all reclaimed wood. And so where we're leading the company is to partner with more prefab builders and builders and architects in general to start seeing reclaimed wood in higher volumes in new buildings and new construction. And so this year we're coming out with new products. We're currently doing an investment round to raise money to launch these new product lines, which we already have buyers for some of them. The sheet goods, as pictured in the top two pictures, we're making a 3/4 inch plywood, 3-layer cross laminated ply. It's solid reclaimed wood. As far as we can tell, it's the first on the market of this nature. And then we're also scaling our flooring to become engineered flooring as opposed to solid flooring to just stretch our lumber further. And lastly, this will be more next year and probably more into 2025, is looking at installation systems for all of our products that are designed for disassembly so that our products can come back out just as easy as they went in. And then in terms of the future of deconstruction, this is a residential project we did with a crane. We're doing a 3-house land assembly in Kelowna right now with an excavator, where we're going to do something similar to this video, which is really to pull the building apart in big sections. So sort of the reverse of prefab construction. And the reason that we're trying to transition into this is to continue to speed up the deconstruction process and reduce the cost of it. So that is our biggest barriers to more work, is that deconstruction takes more time and typically costs more money. We have business models that combat a bit of the financial side of it with our charitable partnerships and acquiring the lumber, but nonetheless, it still does typically cost more money and take more time. And we're also working with policymakers to try to incentivize deconstruction and material reuse as opposed to just penalize demolition. And so just looking forward, at least where I see the industry going, over the next decade is really deconstruction, replacing demolition. I think that's already occurring in a lot of cities in Canada and the US, and that's going to spread. Seeing more salvage materials in projects and getting over the hump of seeing them as used products, and seeing them as a second life, and that's something that's more sought after. And also building in a way that those products or that any products and buildings can be reused and designed for disassembly. So our tagline is, "It's not waste, it's just wasted." And in a visual way, you can see where the industry needs to transition and is transitioning, with us leading the charge here in the Pacific Northwest.
Thank you so much. That was so exciting. All on the edge of our seats. There we are. Now I don't know how to. Hi. Hello. Yeah, it's great. Can you see? I guess you can. Anyways, they're all here. So yeah, thank you all. This is so energizing, exciting, inspiring, and I think, you know, what you're all doing, I think is like pretty clearly a paradigm shift. Like you're literally you're undoing, unbuilding, reusing. And I think this is exciting on so many levels. I'm thinking about like being here in the school and like how we learn, how we train, like how we professionally train, to do this work. And I just think it's so creatively, it's so like rife with creativity in some ways that some like grappling with our crisis, like the major massive kind of ecological and social crises sometimes feels untenable. But there's something about this like super tangible working with what's there that is like so creatively rich, and I find that like very filled with hope and it's inspiring in general. And also because it's literally, I think as we kind of come to be more aware of the harm of the kind of conventional modes of practice of wasting, you're literally working with that same harmful thing. You're like literally trying to change the system of how that happens. So I think that's all really so significant. So I guess for the three of you, maybe the first question is really, and actually, Adam, you kind of exactly answered this at the very end, but I'm just, maybe it can involve like even a little bit of restating, because I think in some ways for me, like one of the biggest questions is like, this is so obvious, right? Like it's so obvious, but yet it's so rare. It's so not the way things typically go. And that's why I think all of your practices are they really stand out as such an important and kind of rare example of how things could be, of how this is like clearly like the way we need to be working. And so on the one hand, I'm kind of curious, like, I think maybe I know, Adam, you said that you started as a builder and were kind of like, couldn't deal with the convention. So you became an entrepreneur and really kind of tackled this in a like very head-on way. And I think your practice is so much about like moving into practice and really stating what you will and not, what you're going to do, and what you're going to focus on. And so I guess my question is, really just actually about, if we kind of know that the agendas that you're all working within your practices are so important and like should be, why are they not? Like what are the barriers? And I mean, you literally said these are the barriers. So I recognize that. But I think, I find that to be the most like really, really wonderful to hear from people who are kind of dealing with it. Like I noticed that you said we need to start like working with the materials and having a kind of storage relationship with the materials, right? We want to do design build. So I imagine that comes from some, challenges in not doing that. Or so I guess for us here, because you're so kind of in the weeds of it, what do you see as like for this field, for construction to have like a much more, for it not to be niche, for it to be a much more robust part of everything, like we all know it should be. What are the aspects that you feel are the kind of most, there's the most friction or like stagnancy? Is it policy? Is it about like is it about training? Is it about like, what kind of really jumps out to you? And maybe we could start with you, Adam, because you can't read our body language.
Well, no, I can see you guys. Well, yeah, I mean, I mentioned that for deconstruction, the barrier is time and money. And I have unfortunately learned over the last 6 years that people don't make their decisions based on what's right or what's good. They make their decisions entirely based on money. And so for us, we've got, unique business models to try to compete financially directly with demolition. But it doesn't work for everyone. Getting a tax receipt to offset the additional costs. Some people don't want that, or they're a corporation, so it doesn't actually have that much value. And so I'm still amazed that Daly, and in Vancouver and Vancouver Island, basically the most liberal, sustainably focused populations probably in the country, it feels like daily I have the same conversation with people, which is, why this is great, your company's cool, why would I ever pay an extra $1 for this if I'm not forced to? Even coming from developers that have more money than anyone could ever use. And so it sort of amazes me, but it doesn't anymore because I've had this conversation daily for 6 years. And that's where we've built the business to not be reliant on policy change. But at this point, as a concerned citizen of the world, I think that policy is really mandatory to make this happen on a bigger level, both policy and education. And that's where we're trying to really push. We do a lot of advocacy work with policymakers, and I've helped consult with policymakers that have put deconstruction bylaws in place here in the region. And we're really trying to also appease the development building side, which is, can you incentivize this? If you want deconstruction to happen or building relocation, like moving full buildings, which happens here on the coast, a good amount of time, you really need to give an incentive to developers and owners. You can't just penalize them. You can't just say you have to do this because they'll find ways to not. To save $1, but give them permits early, get them building early, and that's going to save them holdings costs, which will make up the difference, and they'll deconstruct without even thinking. And so policy is a big part of it for sure, and policy that doesn't just penalize, that also incentivizes. And we're seeing good uptake on that, and I know that's in multiple cities in Canada and the US.
Can I just follow up and ask, who's hiring you? Is it the architect, the client, the builder? Who's bringing you on?
So it's usually not the architect. A lot of architects that we know and work with, they'll spec us and they'll tell their clients to hire us, but they don't have the final say. It's usually the builder and the homeowner in residential, and the developer and the builder in commercial. So I mean, our main target markets are pretty much the developers and builders for deconstruction. Our best clients on the reclaimed wood and reclaimed products are architects and designers.
Interesting. So I mean, I think from our perspective, I mean, we started as the architect, so we form a relationship with our clients, and the clients are coming to us because they believe in our ethos. And I think from that perspective, it's very easy for us to transition with them as also their contractor, with being design build now. So I feel like part of that friction that you bring up is just about knowledge and kind of making sure that they have buy-in early on as the homeowner and the client. And
but I will, maybe speaking to that pain point, the reason why we became builders is because of that cost, is because if we go to a GC and we say, hey, we want to take this building apart when we turn it into a passive house, we don't want you to just gut it and throw it all out. The cost of that was hideously expensive because they hadn't done it before. They didn't know what that would involve. And so doing it ourselves means we can shave the fat off. We're sort of, we're going to do this so that that isn't going to be hideously expensive. Right?
Yeah, but I think there's also just finding, you start finding things that like Adam was speaking about like asbestos that's under layers or lead paint. And, there's all these things that it just kind of becomes part of the construction industry that nobody really checks on anymore. And you start seeing like, oh, all this offcut stuff, you hire really inexpensive contractors that are going to just use a lot of, produce a lot of waste while they're hanging drywall or insulation and things like that. And it could be different. And I think getting involved, having more control, at least is a way to understand how to change things. We were just coming up against, where we would spec things and like Adam was saying, put it in drawings to deconstruct buildings, and builders wouldn't do it in the end. And it was just, we were
getting a bit frustrated.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how did you do it?
It's just how did you, like, as architects, you just started doing it? How did you kind of train yourselves, or?
So we're really only 1 year into being design build, and we were waiting for the right project, for the right client who would give us a chance. And it was we're calling it our tiny Queen's Passive house. It's really only 1,000 square feet. And a really good client who said, yes, go for it. And yeah, we figured it out, and we're still figuring it out. Sort of who are the right partners to come pick the stuff up? Where do we send the remaining stuff to? But now we are on to our 3rd, and we're getting the hang of it a little bit more, figuring out our systems.
Thanks. Okay, go ahead.
Can I just add to that you mentioned something there that is another barrier that I didn't mention, which is the infrastructure downstream, so that you have outlets for the materials. So it's one thing to deconstruct them, you take it all apart, you've got it all site separated. Now what do you do with it all? And so that's a big. We're very fortunate in Vancouver. It's also why we started here, because we have recycling streams or salvage streams for almost all the different materials. But I know that that's not the case in every region, and we've talked to people in like the GTA, Calgary, Montreal, different areas that don't necessarily have all of those outlets. So they couldn't hit 95% salvage and recycle in their region because they literally don't have a recycling company there. So that's something that we're working closely with some recycling partners to look at as we want to expand to new markets, whether they'd come along with us to have that infrastructure for the contractors and building owners.
I was thinking about a couple years ago, we had May Bowley from Repurpose Savannah, which is a talk as part of the lecture series at the school. And what Repurpose Savannah does is they train women in deconstruction labor. So they also have a materials salvaging business. But May was talking a lot about how because it was kind of like it was outside of the convention, like kind of the big conventional construction industry, it was kind of peripheral. It was possible for them to have, she talked about all the things you've just mentioned in terms of cost and like the difficulty of, or let's say the rareness of opportunities to learn how to do that. But she talked a lot about how they were in their organization able to kind of have a lot more women involved in construction than like typically would have been if they were doing a different kind of construction crew. And so I guess that made me wonder, from your point of view, how these practices of deconstruction and adaptive reuse, are there aspects in them that change that let's say change other things about the construction process besides energy and material? Like I think the energy and material use is clear, but if there are other like social dynamics or other things that are also impacted because it's a bit of a different approach outside of the kind of what we think of as the conventional industry, construction industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think it leads naturally to more collaboration, which feeds well into a lot of design of today, which is more of that collaboration, getting the different sub-trades together in advance before the project really gets going. There's a few, we typically have like an abatement partner, a demolition partner that comes in and does the foundation. And so there's naturally this collaboration that happens, which from my experience prior, it was more chopped up, the construction process, less of that like integrated design. And I do think that in general, like the workers, at least like our employees at Unbuilders, they are typically fueled by a bit more of that mission. So you tend to get, pretty high quality people. And we have like overqualified people being laborers on a site because we've got a few architects actually that went through school for architecture and they didn't want to sit in an office behind a computer every day. They wanted to be hands-on. They wanted to be on multiple sites. So they joined our team and have been with our team for years now. So yeah, I think that any mission-driven company in general, and especially a movement like deconstruction, adaptive reuse, reclaimed materials, is going to attract more passionate people than traditional businesses.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We found the same, and we found that actually we love our team, and our team collaborates, and we're also finding the right subs. And it starts with deconstruction, but for us, building a passive house is really another reason why we wanted to do it ourselves, because there's so much care that has to go into doing it the way that we want to do, avoiding the spray foams and starting to think about how can we build a healthy passive house. And so collaboration is key. We've actually found that our entire build team is women. And I don't know why that happened, but it's great.
Hi there. Thank you for your lecture. I just want a general question of what is your opinion on the difference between deconstruction and disassembly? Like, what's the difference between those two different terminologies and the way architecture practitioners look at materials and the way that we construct? And then I guess specifically talking about yours, Adam, what's the future of Ontario wood architecture? Like, if BC is drying up and we're getting over 60 to 70% of our wood material from Quebec and BC, like what kind of situation are we looking at?
So I mean, I'll answer the first question. Deconstruction, disassembly. I mean, I use them almost interchangeably, but I guess if you really wanted to get down to it, deconstruction would be taking a building apart to maximize the salvage, whereas disassembly, I think of more like modular construction where it comes apart intact to go back together intact, like full building components. I think that's probably how I would separate the two terms. So like design for deconstruction is more compartmentalized, design for disassembly is more on a larger component aspect. And then in terms of Ontario architecture and wood, I mean, it's interesting because you're seeing a rise of mass timber. You're seeing wood construction actually increasing in popularity, not decreasing, especially as we start to look at embodied carbon and look at the embodied carbon in concrete and steel. So the wood industry is actually on the rise, yet at least the mills in parts of BC are shutting down. But for the most part, the amount of lumber we have in this country to feed the Canadian construction industry, we have way more than enough. Most of our lumber is going to the US. And so in the last 12 months, as the US housing market has taken a huge downturn, the mills have also had to reduce prices, and supply has outweighed demand, but it's mostly coming from the US. The Canadian housing market, at least from in the West Coast and the people I've talked to, I was just in Toronto as well. It doesn't seem like the Canadian housing market is having as much of a slowdown. It is slowing down for sure, especially in periphery markets, but there is more than enough lumber in this country to feed our construction industry forever. It's just, we may have to be more restrictive how much goes to the US, but they're our best customer too.
I was only going to add also because of one of Adam's previous slides. To me, the difference between deconstruction and disassembly is almost that deconstruction is what we have to do now, and disassembly is something that we aim to get to. But we have to design that into the systems we design for. Yeah.
I really enjoyed both lectures, and I was just curious what you think the role of both like the role and what the best way of sharing the kind of knowledge and skills that are kind of unique to disassembly and also integrating that into design. And I wonder what you think the best way of communicating and kind of open sourcing that information is.
In terms of sharing knowledge of, I mean, for deconstruction, I would say that architects should band together and find ways to share the things that are coming out of buildings. I've seen some practices, I think in San Francisco, start scanning everything that's coming out, making an inventory that could then be distributed. And people can kind of collectively mine these even before they come out of the buildings. Do you have any thoughts on disassembly?
Yeah, I mean, on that point, it's something that we're looking at for how do we expand deconstruction? Like on Builder's mission is not, well, I mean, we want to be a big, great company, but our main mission is to make deconstruction the industry standard. So it's not just about us alone. It's about helping the transition of demolition companies to deconstruction. And so, because there's a lot of great demolition companies, I think that I try to make sure that I also give respect to some of these companies that have been around a long time and are very good at what they do. They need to adapt because it's not what we need to do as a society anymore. And so something that we're looking at on how do we share that knowledge, share our knowledge and train is we're looking at that over the next 12 months is creating like a licensing package, which includes full training manuals, training videos of how to actually do the hands-on work, as well as our systems behind the scenes of tracking, logging our inventory, tracking it, logging our waste and managing our projects and our costs along the way. So we're looking at bundling that into like a software program and licensing that to demolition contractors across North America.
I wanted to add that I think it's one thing that it seems to be very interesting about deconstruction. Like you mentioned, I think you called it a movement before, Adam. And I think there is so much collaboration going on, and maybe just like in terms of one resource that would be, I think is a really great place to start is there's a organization called Build Reuse. It's based in the States, but they're partners in Canada as well. And they have, they've been having conferences that are amazing. They're online, and they've been doing this for many years. But they're really bringing together like talks and speakers, practitioners, policymakers. They made an early deconstruction textbook. You know, it was like they were like, we don't know where to begin. So they started to build this up. So I think there's so much collaboration between different people who are all trying to, like see it as a movement.
Hi. Oh, sorry. I'll be so quick. I guess you kind of mentioned it already, but there's this rising popularity of building with mass timber. So I'm wondering what your guys' thoughts are on that. And especially kind of focusing on like high rises. And I'm not sure if this is maybe the builders as much as it is the architects that are maybe pushing for this popularity. But yeah.
Yeah, I mean, how to answer this? I think mass timber is great, and I think we should be definitely going towards using timber over, steel and concrete where possible. I do think, we kind of stepped back after our first project and looked at, could we disassemble this? Like, was it the right application? And I do think, some things that are worth thinking about when working with mass timbers, there's a lot of different types. There's nail laminated, dowel laminated, and some of these don't use adhesives. Cross laminated does use adhesives. That was actually one of the things that prevented it from getting approved in New York City for so long, is the delaminating of the plies. So I do think, even a system that when it becomes popular, that, you should definitely question, is that the best application? But
yeah, I will add, I've become really passionate sort of looking into old timber, the forests, and it matters. I think once we figure out how to not clear cut, but forest in a way that is sustainable and regenerative, and we can harvest trees as we need them, use the old growth in our, like mass timber is, I mean, these new timber technologies are great, but we have to be aware how we're getting them and how it's produced. And so it's striking that balance. If we go way in that direction and sort of overuse it in a way where the forests are not part of that equation, then it's not a good thing.
Yeah, I think that I pretty much echo those sentiments. I think that if you're looking at concrete or steel or mass timber, then the argument's pretty easy just in terms of the embodied carbon and the resources that go into lumber versus concrete and steel. It's significantly lower. And I think that mass timber in general is a fairly easy, it's sort of designed for disassembly. It's not quite there because I know there's still adhesives in the joints and there's like the big timber screws, but in general, it is much more deconstructible than concrete and steel, which is not. You can only recycle concrete and steel. So I think it's definitely a move in the right direction. And then in terms of other types of mass timber, like we've provided reclaimed lumber for nail laminated timber in a housing project, and we're actually looking to supply someone in the next month with lumber for dowel laminated timber, DLT. So even going into different mass timbers, there's actually areas where you can introduce reclaimed wood into it. I think it'll be pretty hard to do that in the CLT until the scanning and the denailing is at a higher level, more automated, which there's one company I know of that's working on that. Because the CLT producers we've talked to, they will not go anywhere close to reclaimed wood at the moment, because if they hit something with their CNC, the cost to recalibrate and get a new bit and everything, it's just way too high for them to risk it. So yeah, I think mass timber is a great movement, but yeah, as it was said, you can overcut the forest too, and managing our forests sustainably is something that we need to do better as an industry, the logging industry here. But I do think it is a good movement, and I think that reclaimed wood introduced into mass timber is also has great potential.
Does this type of deconstruction allow for a better understanding of how materials can be disassembled? So are there new ideas and insights that can come from the disassembly process? And like, I guess, learning how we can design for better disassembly and reassembly? Because I know as architects, we don't have as much of an understanding of what it takes to deconstruct something as the actual deconstructors do. So I guess this is a question for both of you. Like, how can we learn from the process of deconstruction? And is there a way that architects can engage more, and designers in general can engage more in that process to learn for future design?
I'll start. I think Adam mentioned it before, but I think it's about making sure that we, as we design, we sort of retain the wholeness of materials more. We don't gunk them up too much with adhesives and glues, and we use more fasteners that come apart or gaskets instead of glues to tighten things. So it's already thinking when putting something together how it can come apart into its component pieces.
I think, looking at older school technologies too are sometimes better than some of the new things. Like what was there before sealants. Oakum is one product that kind of was used to seal ships and water lap joints. So looking at, can we go back to some, look at these older technologies to help us. Co-Adaptive does a lot of passive house construction. And one of the things we use a lot now are tapes and membrane. And we're trying to get away from that more and more and looking at gasketed connections, looking at things that are more like the passive house windows that are with gaskets as opposed to things that are gonna, these tapes are very, very sticky. They'll break, pull the wood apart before they'll tear. So just, I think we're going in a direction as an industry, in a good direction. But I think it's constantly questioning the stuff that we're putting in. And can we do better? Can we make the tapes better? Can we not use the tapes?
Simplifying. I found that simplifying means if you're simple in the things that you put together, it's simpler to take them apart.
Yeah, and I think for sure, like I learned so much deconstructing. I almost learned more deconstructing on how to build than building, and for a lot of the same reasons. And also looking at old buildings and how strong they were, how strong they still are, which just showed the pure strength of this old growth lumber. Also, old houses, people always ask us, you must come across a lot of mold and mildew, and we don't, because they were so leaky, they had no insulation, that air flowed right through the walls. So we actually rarely come across mold in old houses, which obviously it's not good to have uninsulated walls and leaky walls, but it shows just how dangerous like poly vapor barrier was that we tried to push on everything for a couple decades, and how that just trapped moisture in our walls and in our insulation. And so yeah, there is a lot that I've learned as a builder and also as a furniture maker from deconstructing. And I do think it's quite valuable. It's something like I taught the first deconstruction course here at BCIT, and I've been pushing the BCIT to look at having the various trades do a week or two of deconstruction as part of their trade program, whether you're in electrical, plumbing, carpentry, or even on the design side, because I think it is really valuable. And I mean, I know a few architects that we work with here that did, after their architecture degree, they went and worked as builders or as project managers with build companies before they fully got into their architecture practice. And I think that that's so valuable. I think they have such a different understanding and appreciation of how the building should be designed and go together, but also all the various trades and all the layers, and how that pass along from one subtrade to the next is so crucial to have everyone on the same page.
I know, Adam, you have a hard stop, and so we're gonna thank you very much. We're gonna just actually take one more, if you guys are okay. We'll take one more question. That's true, right? You have to log off.
Yeah, I mean, I can take one more question.
Oh, can you? Okay, so we'll take one more. Great, thanks. Okay.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for the great presentation. It's very exciting and inspiring. So my question was, and I think you kind of answered it maybe in some ways, but are there any like very cool materials that basically my question is this: as a future architect, if I want to be designing for disassembly, is it up to me to kind of use the materials and products that are already out there and put them together in like a way that can be disassembled? Or are there some really cool products that are actually already designed for disassembly that I could be looking at more, as opposed to like conventional construction materials.
I don't know of anything that exists yet, but maybe that's just me.
I mean, I think for me, like the first step is thinking of almost how Adam's thinking of it, like productizing something. Like how do we make architecture a little bit more as a product that can be deconstructed, so a system. And then from there, you know, I think starting to iterate on what the materials are and can we make those better and what needs to change. But I feel like it comes from like a constructability perspective first and an organization of the assembly, and then, you know, thinking about what the material changes would have to be to adapt to that. I would say.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that there are some systems, especially in Europe. I know I was in Spain a few years ago, and in my mind, I designed like wall clip systems of how to put, because we're making plywood. I knew we were going to get into plywood. How can we make walls with reclaimed plywood instead of drywall, and how can they clip and fasten? And I was sitting in a hotel in Spain looking at the walls, and they already had that system. They had wall panels. Everything was actually designed for disassembly already in the hotel I was staying at. And I was my mind was sort of blown. And I do think that there is a lot of this technology in Europe. They are doing this work. They're in a lot of ways. It seems like European construction and design is 10 to 15 years ahead of us here in North America. And then the other thing that I like to sort of draw an analogy between the way we build buildings, primarily in Canada and the US, and a few other areas like New Zealand and Australia. This site construction is just so inefficient. Obviously different if you're talking about a renovation or adaptive reuse, but if you're talking about new construction, like imagine if you were going to buy a new car and you hired a team of mechanics and they show up in your driveway with some metal and they start building a car in your driveway. It's so absurd, and that's how we build our buildings. So I believe the stat, the last I looked, it's like less than 2% of buildings in North America are prefabricated or modular. And in places like Germany, it's over 80%. So, I mean, if you want to look at how to design to maximize both the design for disassembly, but also minimize the waste, I think the rise of prefabrication is going to continue to increase more and more in North America in a steady stream. And I think for, you know, the architecture students, the students in the audience, and really anyone in the industry, I think the whole point of these conversations that are happening right now, it should be really exciting, because this is a new frontier of construction and design that we're walking into. I think the next 10 years in the industry are going to have more innovation than the last 100. And so I find it a really exciting time. And there's so many great companies that I know of in both Canada and the US right now, pushing the envelope in all kinds of different areas. So I think what the construction design industry looks like in 10 years is significantly different than it is today.
That's a great sentiment to end on. So I just want to thank all of you so much for your amazing talks and for the great discussion and conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you.